Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today on this Friday afternoon. My goal for this session today is to end your week on a high note full of information, inspiration, and above all, action. My name is Chelsea Collier, and I'm the founder of Digi.City. We're an online platform that shares information and events around civic engagement and how smart cities and smart city technology can address social and civic challenges. So speaking of social and civic challenges, the year 2020 has certainly brought our nation's most pressing issues to the forefront. The pandemic has highlighted inequities in our communities, which invites a new level of political, social, and civic engagement. It's obvious that we are all feeling the pain, we're feeling the anguish, we're feeling the discomfort, and out of that, we want to move into positive action. And so it's with this spirit that I invite this panel of incredible innovators and really rock stars around digital skills building. And what makes this conversation unique is that we're not just focused on one aspect of digital skills building, but rather a continuum and across the entire process. From digital literacy to preparing students for higher education, for preparing adults for employment that requires tech skills, each of our esteemed speakers represents a holistic approach which is critical to increase access, increase prosperity for everyone, no matter the color of your skin, your gender, or the zip code that you were born into. So with that, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our panel. I'll go through in a list and then I'll invite each of you panelists just to describe a little bit about yourself, your organization, your perspective, and most of all, your passion for engaging communities and creating positive change. So Plinio Ayala is the President and Chief Executive Officer for Scholas. Aguirre is the Director of Adult Education and Workforce Development in UnidosUS. Justina Nixon-Santil is the Director of Corporate Social Responsibility for Verizon, and Matt Stephenson is the Executive Director and co-founder for Code to College. So Plinio, let's start with you. Give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and the awesome work of Scholas.
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for including me as being part of this virtual panel, and certainly I am honored to be with all of my co-panelists hanging out on a Friday afternoon. Scholas has been around for 25 years, but from the very beginning, we believe that talent is hidden right in front of us in communities that are often overlooked. People who are incredibly smart, highly motivated, tremendously gritty, given the right opportunity, can really change the trajectory of their future. And so we work with hundreds of employers across this country to build effective IT training models that allow our students to gain the skills to be able to build amazing IT careers. Over the years, what's emerged is an organization that now is a national one. We are in 14 cities across this country, having launched our two most recent cities in Chicago and Charlotte, right in the middle of this pandemic. Wow. Serving thousands of Americans a year. But as we think about the future of this organization, we believe it's our responsibility to come up with new strategies that allow us to scale, not just in the regions that we're in now, but certainly in other regions, because the truth is that the demand for our services has never been greater. And so we've got to figure out a way of scaling and serving more Americans in years to come.
Great. Perfect. Really appreciate that. Anna, tell us about your work at UnidosUS.
Thank you, Chelsea, for having me. UnidosUS is the largest Hispanic civil rights organization serving the Hispanic community through research, policy analysis, state and national advocacy efforts, as well as program work with community-based organizations across the nation. We work with an affiliate network of almost 300 community-based organizations across the nation who are doing the work. And many of them are actually implementing some of the programs created by UnidosUS. One of the initiatives that I wanted to highlight today is Latinos at Work, which is really addressing the digital literacy skills needs needed in our community. Our program is in partnership with Verizon, and it offers digital literacy and work readiness, contextualized so that participants can actually apply for jobs online. So for example, as somebody is learning about Microsoft Word, they're actually working on their resume, finalizing that, getting feedback, and being able to have it ready for a job. As they're learning about email, they're creating a professional email so that they can apply to these job boards and be able to apply for jobs. As they're learning how to navigate the internet, sometimes, many times for the first time, they're learning how to search for jobs, how to apply. And so we really think that this approach that contextualizes our learning to what the real needs are is very crucial and really important, especially now. I think when we think about the need for jobs, but also the digital literacy gap, this is a way that we can start bridging some.
Perfect. And that's a perfect segue, Justina. I know you've been a real advocate for this program. Tell us about the work that Verizon's doing in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for having me here today. And that, you told us to all wear white.
I actually didn't, by the way. It's really a cool coincidence.
So I lead the development and implementation of Verizon Innovative Learning, which is an initiative that underscores Verizon's commitment to digital inclusion. And digital inclusion is one of our primary focus areas for our social responsibility work at Verizon. And what digital inclusion is all about is really providing the connectivity and resources, the application, so that everyone could be successful in the digital economy. And that's been a focus of our community impact programming for many years. So one of our signature programs is Verizon Innovative Learning Schools, which we launched in 2014. And through that program, we bring connectivity, devices, teacher training, and STEM curricula to Title I schools across the country. So around 35% of students, low-income students, do not have access to broadband. And I think that came to light, especially when the pandemic hit in March. So we have schools that have been a part of this program since 2014, and they were actually successful in moving to remote learning, in the last few months. We have 253 schools in the program today, and we have a target of reaching 350 next year. And around 81% of the students in our schools are Black and Latino, and around 86% of them qualify for free and reduced lunch. And it's been a significant investment from Verizon. We have spent around $400 million in the last few years focused on this program and making sure that we are providing the students with the skills they need to be successful in the future. And then last year, we partnered with Unidos to create a digital literacy curriculum for the Latino population. And we're continuing to expand our work with adults around workforce readiness skills and digital literacy skills as we move forward. So I think there's a lot to look forward to. I think we've seen that there's a significant digital divide, especially for low-income participants, something that we have known for many years. And I think all of our companies are working very diligently to figure out how to support these populations and make sure that they could be successful in the future.
Yeah, I know that gives a lot of us comfort, especially I know the folks who are watching, but we had an amazing amount of questions come in and we have an hour. So, we won't be able to get to all of them, but this was a top, kind of area of concern and interest for people. So thanks for addressing that. Matt, tell us more about Code to College and some of your, what I know are recent successes.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, and it's great to be here. Code to College, we're an Austin-based nonprofit, and we're focused on addressing the access and opportunity gaps that minority and low-income students face in STEM undergraduate majors and careers. And I'm assuming that folks know what STEM is, but for those who don't, it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, so technical fields. So in our program, we actually source volunteers from about 50 companies now, including Retail Me Not, General Motors, Atlassian, Indeed, and more, to deliver after-school coding and web development education, professional skills training, everything from how to develop your first resume to interview prep skills. We worked with PIMCO and a global asset manager yesterday, helping students build their first LinkedIn profiles. We also do STEM industry case competitions, everything from a big data case competition with Cloudera to a fintech one with Q2 to a semiconductor case study with Silicon Labs, to expose students, because if you can't see it, you can't be it. and we want to ensure that students have a wide variety of exposure to STEM disciplines. We also offer ongoing mentorship opportunities, as well as a variety of employment opportunities for our students, everything from paid web development all the way up to software engineering and software development internships with leading tech partners like Atlassian, Indeed, and some of the others that I mentioned. What's exciting is that these are not job shadowing opportunities, that these students are doing actual worthy work. More than half of their work goes into production. They're working alongside undergraduate students. And so anytime I get a senior manager from a prospective company ask, well, what can a high school student do? Many times to go to the actual websites of these major tech companies and point to features that our students have developed and deployed.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
Thank you very much. One thing you had mentioned a couple of the successes that we've had. You know, COVID hit all of us pretty hard, and I know we'll talk more about this, but we pivoted significantly by going 100% virtual. In addition to that, several of our interns had their offers rescinded because those companies canceled their summer 2020 internships across the company, and we were able to hire them ourselves to work as Code to College interns. So they built our first learning management system. So we've been able to successfully move from Google Apps. And I would say the biggest initiative right now is our Vision 2024. We are raising $1.5 million to place 200 Black and Latinx women into STEM roles by the year 2024. So very excited about that work and the hard work we have ahead.
Yeah, it's a great goal. And I think that has obviously a ripple effect for many, many years. And Matt, I'll open this question to you just real quick before we get into the meat of our discussion and then open this to everyone to answer. But what's the one thing that you think most people don't understand about digital skills building and technology access issues specifically for underserved communities?
So I think that I was thinking it was a good question. I think that most people conflate access with ability, and as a student may live in a zip code, as was mentioned before, that they may or that their school may lack equitable technical resources, that infers that they don't have the capacity to be digitally literate, or that there's some assumption that they don't have the capacity to acquire the skills to be successful. And I think that that's compounded, that lack of access is compounded because the gatekeepers then prioritize access for those who already had the access. And so access and ability are two different things. The students that we serve in particular at Code to College, 76% are Black or Latinx, 53%, so the majority are female, 51% receive free or reduced price lunch, so the government's proxy for low-income household status, and 36% will be the first in their families to pursue a college degree. And so while this is squarely within the target of the students who need this type of access, they are performing and outperforming their peers. And so it's not about a talent deficit, it's about an opportunity deficit.
Yeah. Plinio, I see you shaking your head, so it seems like there's a lot of agreement there. Any other thoughts around the one thing that you think most people don't understand about this space?
I think Matt is spot on. I think the definition of the digital divide has evolved over the last couple of decades, right? It's not just about getting someone a computer. It's about getting someone the right computer, the right level of broadband, the right training so that they can take advantage of this new world in which we learn in how we work. In the middle of this pandemic, we converted 521 individuals that were taking classes in our classrooms to a virtual platform.
Yeah, wow.
And in the middle of that transition, we realized that many of our students didn't have the right equipment to be able to take advantage of our training. So we had to deploy hundreds of pieces of equipment to our students to ensure that they could graduate from classes. And it was absolutely the right thing to do. We graduate, or about to graduate, over 90% of our students. Several hundred of them are already working. And it's indicative of our folks being representative, as Matt was saying, people from communities of color where systems have been built to not uplift individuals, but to keep them down. And so for 25 years, we've been trying to push the needle around exactly what Matt was describing, that there is tremendous talent in these communities. Given the chance, they can outshine anybody. And I think we've proven that over the last 25 years.
Yeah, some of the stories that I've just seen looking on your websites and through your social media absolutely showcase that. Anna, is this some of your experience as well, or do you have any other thoughts that might add to the conversation?
Yeah, I think I echo what has been shared. The digital divide is multi-layered. So I think when you think about addressing it, you also have to think about a multi-layered approach. How do you address the fact that there's lack of access to broadband internet at home. There's lack of access to the actual devices. And then there's lack of just the understanding and the skill to be able to navigate those. So I think when we think about programs and partnering with community agencies, we really look at a holistic approach and a lot of like the individualized support that is needed. I am reminded of a great anecdote that one of our affiliates shared with us. They were only limited to 2 days a week, 2 hours to be able to be due to COVID. And who they prioritized were the people who had never worked the computer before in their entire life.
Wow.
Because they did not want to exclude people from this program who absolutely need the digital skills training. So what they were doing is using that time to actually walk somebody through, this is a computer, this is the start button, this is a mouse, like your basics. So I'm reminded that you need that, multi-layered approach. You need community agencies that really understand who they're serving and meet them where they are. Because again, it could be a bit complex because of the systems that we operate in. But I think understanding that you have to have multiple levels and you have to be embedded in one-on-one approach to supporting community members.
Yeah, Justina, it seems like a lot of this is resonating with you too, and it's so great to hear this from service providers. How does that work as a private sector company, and what are your thoughts around it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's spot on what everyone shared. There are a couple of things that we've noticed as well. Number one, there is the thinking that because there's the proliferation of smartphones, with many households, that equates to the ability to use that technology to better one's life, whether it's for education, for healthcare, for other services. So there is a gap between I have a smartphone and I'm using it for entertainment, or I'm using it to connect with friends or family, versus how do I use this for education? How do I access resources that are going to help me and help my students? So when the pandemic hit, we noticed that a lot of our students who took their devices home, the parents were struggling as to how to help them if they had an issue with the device. And we actually worked with our districts and some of our student tech teams to actually support the remote learning at home. But I think there is that difference between I have access to a smartphone, but I need an actual device that can help me better my life for education and other services. Yeah. So that's one of the things that we are trying to focus on as much as possible in helping a lot of populations. I think the other thing that is an issue around the availability of access is teacher training. So there's also the thinking that, great, you have 13-year-olds who, understand how to use technology, and they're in the classroom, but the teachers are not necessarily trained and understand how to use it effectively to engage those students. So even if you provide everyone with a device and you provide the disconnected students with access, how do you make sure that they understand how to use it to advance themselves and their academics? And that's where I think there's also a gap with teacher training. So when you think about budgets for districts where they're focusing on the tech and the access, we always make sure that they understand that they have to put funding aside for teacher training as well. Because if our teachers are not trained, there's going to be a significant gap in learning for our students.
Sure. That's a great point. And the inconsistency, I think, is super important. So when you're looking at this in a national framework, I think a global corporate can really add some benefit there and some consistency. So all of the challenges that we're talking about have been true, for at least the past couple of years, if not the past decade. But then fast forward to our current reality, and here we are in the middle of a global pandemic. So all of these things are obviously exacerbated. And I know the initial concern was around access and training and how digital literacy, if you don't have access to these digital tools, can impact people all along the continuum. So, Matt, you touched a little bit about how Code to College has really rallied in the midst of the pandemic. And I'll just open it up to the panel. What has your experience been in terms of providing services, providing kind of your special sauce to the communities that you enable? Any thoughts there in terms of how this has either been really, really hard or created some new opportunities?
I'll say that I personally, and I think within our organization, we try to embrace a philosophy of finding the opportunity with every challenge. And so with respect to being disconnected from the 500 plus students that we were serving this year, and having to follow up and call and text and email each one of them to find out who had internet access, who had access to hardware devices, et cetera. We created 3 new programs and developed new curricula to address the virtual nature of the programming. We had students actually compete in weekly bake-offs for the business of building websites for clients who were impacted by COVID, and they were actually donating their web development services. There was pulmonologists in Detroit who had an uptick in telemedicine demand. We had a dentist in Oregon who was trying to serve low-income and tribal populations. But the students really dug into this because for the first couple of weeks and almost the first 2 months, schools were scrambling to figure out what to do, and our students were at home sleeping until noon waiting for something to do.
Yeah.
So we used that as an opportunity to engage them while a lot of schools were still trying to figure that out. And we engaged them and met them where they were at on their phones oftentimes. We started to develop a bunch of professional workshops that they thought would be engaging and interesting. And ultimately, this emboldened us to expand nationally. And so we are now officially a national nonprofit, and we are launching programming in Philadelphia as well.
Congratulations on that. And Plinio, you said that you had some kind of initial successes. I'm sure those did not come easy, but what was your experience like in terms of expanding with COVID?
Yeah, I think, we were going down this road of virtual training. We began sort of investing in technology infrastructure and training staff late last year, hoping to pilot a couple of classes this year, never thinking that we needed to pivot as quickly as we did. But at the end of the day, as we reflect back as to what happened, it's built for us a new muscle, right? When we think about virtual training as an opportunity to scale in a very different way than we had originally thought we could, that's clearly an opportunity for us going forward. The one thing that I want to highlight, and I think you mentioned this, Chelsea, when you kicked this off, when we built our budget in 2019 for 2020, there was no line item in our budget that was labeled equipment purchase for students, right? It is now, and it will be going forward. And, I want to be provocative here for a second, because let's call this what it is, right? This is about racial injustice. And when you think about this country, late last year, beginning of this year, touting these record low unemployment numbers for people of color, they didn't finish that sentence, right? What they didn't say was these folks were working in low paying jobs, living paycheck to paycheck. And so this pandemic clearly illuminated just how fragile our communities of color are, right? And so the modest gains that these communities realized over the last 10 years have been wiped out in 3 months. And I don't think I'm overstating this when I say, if we don't fix this issue of the digital divide, it's going to take decades for our communities to realize some of those gains back, if ever. And I think this country needs to step up to this challenge and do something about it.
Yeah, I sincerely appreciate that point, and thank you for bringing it to the top of the discussion. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's not only our economic imperative, it's our moral imperative. And I think it's easy to pre-pandemic not be able to see it in such a highlighted context, but now there is no choice to turn away. And so we are all, as individuals, as organizations, forced to reckon with that and say, what are we actively going to do? And yes, talking about it, learning about it, yes, super important. This conversation is a part of that. And then always spur to action. How are we going to move it forward? So Justina and Anna, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts here, so I want to make sure to get your ideas as well.
Yeah, I think that I think exactly what you were saying, Plinio, around the light that was shown on a lot of disparities that I think a lot of people were not aware of. And when you had the statistics coming out that 35% of low-income students did not have reliable broadband at home, or they didn't even have a piece of technology that was dedicated to them for them to learn from at home. Those are issues that, we're in a crisis situation. And I think it's public-private partnerships, and, Verizon has been a part of this for many years. And, we've been preparing schools to use technology and providing access before this occurred. But I think there needs to be an emphasis on what the government has to do moving forward, and how schools have to think about the students and their livelihoods, right? So we've been talking to a lot of districts now around how they're looking at their budgets and how they're able, right? Not all of them, but many of them are now able to provide technology to their students, whether it's a one-to-one device that they can provide, and a lot of them are figuring that out. Of course, there's also the CARES Act and other funding sources that they're able to use. But I think a lot more investment needs to be provided to these schools so that all students could be successful. And then when you think about the disconnected students, that's another thing. And, Verizon and other telecoms have to play a part in this as well. Mm-hmm. But that's another thing where districts have to figure out, how do we make sure that every student has access at home? This can't be, 50% of our students or 60%. And that's something that we've been talking to a lot of districts for a while. Before the pandemic hit, our program was rolled out with districts that had a vision. It usually was a superintendent or a principal who had a vision around this, mm-hmm. and wanted to roll out the connectivity for their students and bring the devices. A lot of districts had turned us down. It either wasn't a focus, or they could not figure out how to provide all of the additional supports that students were needed, or how they were going to sustain the program after our 4-year partnership. But now it's not an option anymore. It's not just for the visionary superintendent, but it's for every district to think about, how do we solve this problem? How do we make sure everyone has access? So I do think that it is, this is a crisis state we're in. I think that it affects a lot of Black and Latino students the most, as we all know, and their families. And when you think about automation and what's going to happen post-pandemic, with even a lot of the jobs that are lost right now, the adult population, how do we make sure that they're ready for the jobs of the future? How do we make sure they have digital skills? And I think that's another huge focus of ours. So there are a lot of challenges, and I can tell you there's not one answer, not one way to resolve them. And I think it's going to be public-private partnerships. I think it's going to be, government intervention as well, to figure out, how do we make sure everyone can thrive in a digital economy.
Yeah. And pre-pandemic, I was seeing a lot of kind of, it's their job, depending on what sector you're talking about. Everyone was kind of waiting for the other sector to come in with the solutions. But, when you're in a crisis, everyone rolls up sleeves, and all of a sudden there's this new energy to just break down the barriers and start working together. So if there are any kind of positive outcomes out of this really challenging time, I hope that public-private partnership is a piece of it. Anna, so absolutely want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think something I want to add to the conversation, in order for us to really address this crisis and what needs to be done as organizations, you have to be nimble, you have to be responsive, you have to have services that reflect what the actual needs are. But sometimes the way that organizations are funded, prevents some of the innovation from happening.
Right.
So I think if I could do a call to action, part of it is for our funders and our partners, both in private and the public sector, to allow for this creativity, to allow for this innovation, because sometimes funding is so stringent and so structured that organizations have to find other ways to be creative, to really meet the needs of their community members. So I think we need to realize we are in a crisis, and you need to be able to be flexible. And a lot of that comes from the way that you're funded and what's allowed and not allowed at that level.
Mm-hmm. What a great point. In a crisis, everyone suddenly becomes an entrepreneur. And so you need the systems around to support that level of agility. It's a really important point. So the next question that I have for you all, and I'll just toss it out, and anyone who's motivated to jump in, please do. So I live in Austin, Texas, a very tech-centric community. And obviously that is not the case for a lot of the communities around the US. But no matter if you're an incredibly tech-forward or not city, every single community is facing issues around digital divide and lack of access to digital skills building. So what are some of your thoughts? And Matt, I know up until just recently, you were very locally focused and now nationally focused. So what are your thoughts around kind of national partnerships, national footprints, and then local partnerships too? Justina, kind of riffing on your point around the public-private partnership and just that need to think differently about partnerships. So I'll just open that up if anyone has any thoughts there.
I thought what Anna said was spot on. I got a big smile on my face because I recently wrote a Medium article about white supremacy in philanthropy and how funds are one of the premier ways to control how communities of color, in particular Black and Latinx communities, as well as Black and Latinx organizations operate. And so I think she was spot on with what she said in that I think one of the key things that is missing in many funder relationships is trust, because the local organizations are the ones who have that domain expertise and the local context and the community relationships, and those are the organizations who should be trusted for how funds are deployed. One of the things I wrote in the article was that unrestricted funds and unrestricted assets are the holy grail of nonprofit organizations, because you are effectively saying, I trust you with these funds and that you know best how to deploy them and these resources. And what I would say is these national organizations, whether they be corporations or major foundations, what they need to do is apply a rigorous set of assessment when looking at organizations who are based locally, but they need to apply those assessments in an equitable fashion and not look to who is already in my network and not to trust those who are already in my network, but rather look to those organizations, try to gain as much context and understanding around the work that they do, and then to deploy resources to them as they have shared that they need them, because they know best how to utilize those funds.
I can jump in here as someone on the other side. I think that we have local partnerships and we have national partnerships as well. And it's easier for us to have national partnerships because we have a small team and we're a global organization, we're a global company. So as many locations as we can reach across the US, and we have some work internationally as well, you know, it's better for us as a company to reach as many populations as possible. I think that the question about unrestricted funds, that's something that we hear as well. But on our end, we also have to be able to demonstrate ROI. And we have to align with all company strategies. So if my strategy and my focus is digital inclusion, I will partner with organizations that focus on that, right? What that means is providing connectivity, providing STEM curricula, application, digital literacy skills, you know, providing devices. And that's a lot of what fits under digital inclusion. But we have to be able to understand the mission of the organization and how they're going to be able to align with our strategy, and then how they're going to track results, because we need those results to be able to demonstrate, hey, this program is having an impact. And that allows us to get an infusion of additional funding to continue to support programs like yours and like the Verizon Innovative Learning Program. So I do understand what you mean, but I think that a lot of funders, you know, they're move away from unrestricted funds because of some of those issues. Now, what we've been able to do, and I know this is important, especially when you work with local organizations, whenever we partner with an organization locally, we do listening tours. So we don't sit in New Jersey, and that's something that I miss, that we're not able to travel as much as we have in the past. But we do not sit in an office and say, hey, you know, let's you know, figure out how we're going to work together and just dictate what happens. We actually go out to the community and understand their needs and really spend the time. We conduct listening tours to know what is the kind of program that's going to have the most impact in this location, because what's happening in Houston may be different from what the needs are in Portland. They still fit under our pillar and our focus areas, but they may be slightly different. So we make sure that we listen to the community when we work with partners on what's the best initiative to launch in different locations.
Yeah, that whole idea of being open, listening, and trust, those resonate, I think, across every single conversation, no matter which one that we're having. Plinio, I wonder if you have any thoughts that you'd like to cap this question off with.
Well, I think that partnerships for the sake of having partnerships don't necessarily work. I think effective partnerships are ones where everybody wins, right? And I think for us, you know, we've been able to forge effective partnerships with employers because, yes, they are excited about the mission of the organization, but we're also producing this valuable talent that they're consuming. And so as we think about these public-private partnerships, and I think that there's tremendous opportunity there, Justina, to help solve this issue of the digital divide by creating these partnerships. You know, it's one where everybody sees the economic return, appreciates that, and can continue to move forward because the return is there.
Great. So let's kind of take it up a bit high level, and let's talk about vision. We talked a lot about what you've been able to do, how you all have been able to adjust, really looking at the challenges on the ground in all of the communities that you serve. Now let's kind of future cast. What is the vision for digital skills building specifically in the United States? And again, I'll just kind of open this up and let everyone jump in.
Well, I can kick it off. I think successful cities, both big and small, are going to be the ones that create sustainable models for technology-driven growth, right? It's going to be communities where all of its members are able to help one another create opportunity and build better opportunities, not just to look for them. You know, when our trainees acquire these good-paying jobs, the ripple effect is huge. The life of the student has changed forever, but so has the lives of their family members. Their communities are much, much stronger. You know, we're providing our students the skills and technology to think about their long-term strategy, their long-term success, and build wealth, right? Be able to be in a position where they can create change because they now don't have to worry about how they're going to pay their rent. Let me share a quick story of one of our students, if I can.
Sure.
It's a story of Elena Salem. Elena enrolled in our Boston program in February, right in the middle of the pandemic. And we converted her to virtual, and she was extremely worried that she wasn't going to be able to complete the program. And moreover, she was really worried about how she was going to get a job in the middle of this crisis. We got her the equipment she needed. We got her the support and the training she needed. She graduated with both her certificates. And right upon the completion of training through our employer partner tech system, she got a job working at a biomedical facility as an IT technician, making more money than she's ever made before. I think as we think about Elena and realize that there are so many millions of Americans that can benefit from programs like this, the question is, how do you invest, as Matt mentioned, in effective models in a much heavier way that allows them to scale and have greater impact? And I think that's the challenge of our country, right? How do you the struggle many years ago was, how do you find these effective models? Now you have them. How do you scale them and scale them effectively? And I think if we can figure that out, we're going to drive significant change in our communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And one of the things that we struggle with is scale. And we also struggle with the long-term interventions that the communities of color need. So when we started our Verizon Innovative Learning Program, it was a 2-year program with schools. And we realized by the second year, oh no, we needed to continue working with those schools an additional 2 years because the students needed the connectivity, teachers needed ongoing training, and it takes a while to see results. And then we made the decision this year that we're going to start moving into the high school space in a lot of our districts because our students were then graduating from the middle school program, moving into high school, and then realizing that they did not have the resources they had in middle school with our program, and they were lacking that. So you start looking at a plan, and I know this is something that Plinio, you guys also do with Scholas, where it's not a one-time intervention that's going to make a difference for the communities we're trying to impact. It has to be long-term. It has to be continuous. And then we're, as we continue looking at the need, as we continue to look at the longitudinal plan for our students, we are realizing that we need to continue to support them all along the way, all along a trajectory for success. So I think the scale question is always one that comes up where, how can you reach the masses, right, with a shorter term intervention, or how do you have a longer term, more in-depth support for a smaller group? And that's something that we struggle with. There are 50,000 Title I schools. And if I had my way, especially someone who, grew up extremely under-resourced in the South Bronx in New York, I would try to work with 50,000 Title I schools. But then it becomes a matter of, your resources and how do you make sure that you could provide all the supports that are needed for the young people that we're trying to impact for long term. So we do that is a struggle that we have, and something I think for longer term vision, we're going to look at both, right? How do we create a platform, a K-12 platform where we can provide a lot of resources for the masses, but how do we continue to invest heavily in a lot of our high free and reduced lunch schools to be able to provide longer term support for those students. And that longer term support is something that we're looking into, even moving into apprenticeship programs, internship programs, being able to move into a corporate environment or job placement. So we're looking at those plans to put in place for our students as they move from middle school to high school and beyond.
Well, Justina, I'm glad that you shared no, please, Plinio, go ahead.
I was just quickly going to say, Justina, corporations like yours are amazing, but you can't do it alone. I think government needs to step up here, right? What we need to do is build wealth in our communities. And that is going to take some time. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen with a $500 intervention. This is long term, and we need to be very intentional about that and invest properly to be able to create significant change. It won't happen without government.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. And what I was going to say, which you articulated so wonderfully, is that again, going back to the funding conversation. It's not just up to one group. And when we're looking at providing continuous support around a continuum of a very, very large swath of American, whether you're talking about schools or communities or individuals, it is a massive undertaking. And I think that conversations like these, where we're acknowledging the complexity and really calling for action about what comes next. And the question that we received some really amazing questions from everyone who's watching and listening. And that was the number one thing that really came up, which is what can we all do? So thinking about action related issues, what can people do to move things forward in their community? Is it, identifying different organizations who are providing services, but maybe need some support from a national level organization? Is it expanding models that are already proven, that have existing results, and helping that expand to a more national footprint? I mean, these are just some of the ones that come off the top of my head, but I'm not the expert here. You all are. So when people in communities say, what can I do to improve digital literacy, to improve access to job training, to improve access to digital education, what answers do you deliver?
So I was, this was connected to the last question, but in our model, we actually partner with our 50 plus corporate partners heavily on the volunteer side. Mm-hmm. It's embedded into our program model. And so, I know Justina was mentioning scale, and one of the challenges that some of our peers or many of our peers have faced in delivering coding and web development instruction has been, we don't have the teachers. And so what we do is we have the pedagogical expertise in-house, and we leverage software engineers at these leading companies, and we prepare them to deliver a curriculum that we've built in partnership with them. And so it aligns with the needs and the demands of the tech workforce, and it's being delivered by industry professionals as well. And so you've got not only the formal interaction between students and these engineers, but you also have the informal. How do you get a student who is being respectful, but maybe they're coming from a background where it takes them several months to go from calling me Mr. Stephenson to Mr. Matt to Matt. So when they get to the workforce, they're acclimated appropriately. And so we leverage engineers and developers as instructors, which has allowed us to scale from, I believe it was 6 instructors our first year to over 100 now. Use non-technical professionals to deliver our professional skills training and help them build everything from, as I mentioned, their resumes, the interview skills, et cetera. And so I guess to zoom out, the way that I would answer that question is that folks can get involved. I'm sure that we're not the only organization that has skills-based volunteering, but I would say I would encourage folks to get involved as volunteers as much as possible. Irrespective of whether you're an engineer, whether you are a teacher, whether you're in a function like legal or operations, there's so many opportunities out there when you can where you can deliver digital literacy and other professional skills training to help students get up to speed.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Anna, I know that you all have such a tremendous national footprint and membership base, and that you depend really heavily on your local communities and your local partnerships there. How do you incorporate, willing and able people who are saying, I want to create positive change in my community? What are some of the mechanisms that you use?
Yeah, I think when I think of that question, I think of it's a twofold. There's advocacy that can be done, and also action and practical steps that we can take. And thinking of the previous question of what is our vision, I of getting to a place where digital literacy is not a barrier to opportunity, either in education or employment. And part of how we get there is like, how do we advocate for affordable and universal broadband, including rural areas? How do we advocate and support workforce development programs that have digital literacy embedded into its core and what it is? How do we make these programs available widely, specifically in communities that really need it? I'm also thinking of like partners and funders who can make a commitment, an ongoing commitment to provide access to devices, up-to-date devices. All of this, there's a lot of room for advocacy at that level. When I think about people that may be listening and say, I want to do something maybe, in the next weeks, I want to, get involved, I'm feeling really pumped. I'm thinking about different training programs are enriched by volunteers, people who come in and share their experience, their skills, their own network. They can really enrich those classes. Volunteer to be part of a career panel. Volunteer to, be part of a mock interview. Help somebody, review their resume. If you're really comfortable with technology, it's kind of like second nature to you. Volunteer to do one-on-one coaching for people who this is going to be their first time looking for a job online. So using your own skills, your own time, your own connections, you can definitely make a difference in your local communities.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point that most people probably take for granted, that just by the sheer ability to navigate the world digitally, you have so much to give to people who may not be in your purview. So thank you for that. Plinio or Justina, I wonder if you have any thoughts there.
I can't follow up any better than
that. That's pretty brilliant, right?
Exactly right.
It's a hard act to follow.
Yeah, I think volunteerism, I think that's spot on. And the only other thing I would add is it has to be the responsibility of businesses, right? It can't be philanthropic all the time. It can't be that there's a set amount of funding that's been set aside to support communities. I think companies have to look at it from what's our social responsibility overall, right? From the products that we offer, are they affordable? The access that we provide into all communities, no matter where you're located. How do you work with suppliers and partners to make sure they're doing the right thing for communities? So I think it's just an overall responsibility for corporations and people who work for corporations to advocate for their companies to be doing this work as just what they do and not just a subset of their initiatives.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I really appreciate about all of your programs is that there is such a close collaboration between the communities that you serve, your organizations, and then a corporate and or nonprofit partner. So, Justina, I'm not trying to leave you out of that conversation, but it's the flowing of how do we collectively bring what we have to give in order to move it all forward. And looking at workforce development initiatives in some states, they're very advanced and they're really thinking about digital skills and how to build that into how different communities are rewarded. But some are really behind the times, and not saying that non-technical jobs aren't important. They are absolutely important. I'm not trying to create a hierarchy, but a lot of times the workforce development agencies don't know how to incorporate this. So I think there's obviously a lot of work to be done for everyone, but we can't forget about our friends at the state level and advocating for those changes in workforce development programs. So they are enabling that and moving it forward at a higher level. So one of the questions that we received more than once, actually, so I see a kind of trend here, was the idea that there may not be enough technical jobs for the number of quote unquote reskilled individuals. And I thought that was an interesting perspective, and obviously coming from someone who is experiencing this. So I don't know if you all have kind of thought through any of that, or if that's what you're experiencing. Maybe the answer, not to prime the response, but maybe the answer is just more of what you all do every single day and more communities across the US. But I don't know. I have more questions than answers there, so I'll leave it to the experts. I know it's a tough one. It's a stumper.
there's a surplus of technical jobs. There are, I believe, I mean, this is a stale figure, but they said, I believe it was back in 2015 or 2016, that there are about 1 million software engineering or computing related jobs that were going unfilled, and that number only continues to outpace the supply of talent. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be a problem for us.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I see that as in a weird way, very good news sometimes, where there might just be a perception issue, and that's something to address. So,
Well, I think Matt is right. I think certainly the advent of artificial intelligence was going to create a contraction in jobs for sure going forward, but it's also going to create new jobs that we don't even know what they're going to look like in years to come. The one thing we do know, and I'm sure Matt and Anna can attest to this, that people from the communities we serve, if we can get them in, they are resourceful enough to figure it out as the changes come. And so I think our challenge is, how do we get as many people as we can into these jobs now, so that when the changes do come, they can navigate their way through the endpoint.
yeah.
I agree. I think, one of the things that we're looking at very closely around the digital divide is also new technologies like 5G. So the world is changing. Verizon is deploying new technologies. What does that mean, right, for future jobs, right? What does that mean for all of the different types of solutions that could ride on those technologies? So I think as technologies expand and they're new, there are going to be a lot more opportunities. I don't know if it's a matter of, am I getting trained on a very specific technology or programming software, or am I learning problem solving skills and other skills that are going to help me to be able to attain employment no matter what the technology is, or no matter what the new product or solution is. So I don't think that there's going to be a shortage of jobs. And one of the things that we always talk about is the fact that you may not be training an engineer, right? You may not be training someone specifically to go into mechanical engineering, although that would be great. I'm one, but we're making sure that everyone has the tech skills that they need for these jobs, because there will be no job in the future that will not require tech skills of some level. So I think that's important, there's a difference between I'm training to be an engineer or an IT computer scientist, and et cetera, versus every job will require tech skills, and we have to make sure we bring everyone along this continuum.
Yeah. So I can't believe it's already at time. We've been talking for an hour, and I just appreciate all of your willingness to jump in on a very complex topic that is top of mind for all of us across the U.S. Closing thoughts, everyone, and then I'll kind of spur everyone to action. Anna, I'll start closing thoughts with you before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think something, and then that question, I think, in thinking about it, I think we have to think about digital skills training as transferable skills. And really what it is, it's a notion of equity and being able to make our community members be competitive for the jobs of now and also the jobs of the future. And so as much as we can advocate to start filling this gap, I think the more impact we're going to see in the long term.
Thank you for that. Matt, closing thoughts.
So I was on a radio show earlier this week talking about the work that we do, and there was a caller who was asking, my daughter, she's 7 years old, and I just want to find out, how do I help her with coding, because I don't want to touch it, but what can I do for her? I said, well, why don't you want to touch it?
Yeah.
We need to sort of demystify and remove the sense or the conception that learning how to code and programming and digital literacy is this intimidating thing that is just for them, in quotes, but rather it's for all of us. And I said that digital literacy and learning how to program is something that helps you to understand the world around you today in 2020, and that will only increase over time. And so, I would say to anyone listening, I would encourage you to become as digitally literate as possible. There are low barriers, very extremely low, as in the cost is zero to learn how to code, and it will change your life. So that's my encouragement to any and all.
Good advice. Justina, closing thoughts.
I feel especially what's happening with us in the middle of a pandemic, and also what's been happening around racial injustice. I feel like there's hope, and I have to feel that way. It's been a very difficult 6 or 7 months, I think, for all of us, and I feel like there's hope because of these conversations. They're being held a lot more frequently. There are a lot of companies that I think want to do the right thing, and they want to figure out how to help communities of color. And a lot of them are making pledges. A lot of them are looking at their processes and what they can do, even more so than they've ever done before. So I feel like there's hope that we can really make a difference moving forward. And we're able to help a lot of the underrepresented and under-resourced populations that we want to be successful in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Plinio, you started off our conversation. I'll let you wrap it up. What are your final thoughts?
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you, Chelsea. If there are any lawmakers in the audience, here's a plea to you guys. I think you have a responsibility to pass what I believe to be sweeping legislation, right? Really on par with some of the greatest infrastructure initiatives that this country has ever realized. Because the truth is that broadband should be viewed as an essential infrastructure, and create a way that we can ensure affordability and accessibility to the internet for every American, regardless of where they live, regardless of where they come from. It's not just, as you mentioned, Chelsea, a moral imperative. It's an economic imperative, and I think we need to get that done.
Yeah, perfect. I think you will see lots of agreement on this panel. Everyone, thank you so much. I'm not overstating it when I say this is really a dream come true to have your expertise dedicated to be able to host this conversation is a very true honor. Thank you, everyone who's listening and watching. We appreciate you spending your Friday afternoon with us. Now you know what to do. It is time for all of us to get busy. We've learned from this panel of experts what needs to happen next. So now's time to move into action. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.